So as we just heard, Russia has declared this victory in Mariupol. How has Ukraine responded to this? And talking about that hotspot, the Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol, what has Ukraine has to say about it?
Good morning. Ukraine's Vice Prime Minister, in a very strict responsible for organizing green corridors at the highest level, said everything is going very slow on Mariupol. I quote, "On the Russian side, everything is very complicated, chaotic, slow, and of course dishonest." Mrs. Vereshchuk also noted that the fact that on Thursday, for the first time, people went from Mariupol to Zaporozhye directly. There are people were sitting in 4 out of promised 90 buses that left Mariupol on Thursday. She said that this gives hope. And speaking about Azovstal, Ukrainian defenders of Mariupol, who are now locked in this plant, have also spoken with the highest political commanders on providing a corridor for not only civilians locked in the bunkers of that plant, but also a corridor for the military community with the aim of saving military personnel. And spokesman for the President Zelenskyy, Mikhail Podolyak, and one of the main negotiators with Russians, David Arakamia, agreed to arrive to Mariupol for these kind of negotiations. Also, Mayor of Mariupol, Vadim Boychenko, said on Thursday, at least one whole day is needed to evacuate civilians from Azovstal bunkers. But he also stressed that Ukrainian defenders will leave the plant only with their arms in their hands. President Zelenskyy, in his turn, said the Ukrainian government is ready to deblocade Mariupol even with military means, but he needs help from abroad. And moreover, Mr. Zelenskyy reported that Russia has rejected a proposal to establish an Easter truce. Russia says it doesn't believe in truce in Mariupol since it will give Ukrainian army temporary respite and the opportunity to regroup. Back to you.
Also, Victor, President Zelenskyy says Ukraine needs $7 billion a month to make the country's economy running. So this might be a little bit surprising number to the IMF. So has the Ukrainian government provided details on how it will spend that amount of money?
Well, it is unclear yet, but the situation is really bad. This money needed to cover economic losses inflicted by the conflict with Russia, by the war with Russia. And Mr. Zelenskyy also added that blockade of the Ukrainian ports and the Black Sea affects global food security. And ending the war is the only way to stop the global food crisis. Ukrainian GDP could fall by more than 50% this year. And I have to tell you that situation is really tough. For instance, one businessman told me off records that machinery business is shut because all parts for this high-tech business were usually taken from now destroyed and sieged Mariupol, occupied Melitopol, and destroyed Kharkov. Back to you.
Thank you very much and take care. Our correspondent Viktor Manikov in Kiev. Now let's go to Stuart Smith in Moscow. Stuart, Russia says it has taken in 140,000 civilians from Mariupol through humanitarian evacuations. Tell us more about that effort.
Yeah, the Ministry of Defense said that was the figure they're working on here in Russia. That was when the defense minister was speaking to the Russian President Vladimir Putin yesterday in a morning update. And that means, he says, with the city so-called liberated, He says there's a chance, once it calms down and operations get back to normal, that very soon some of these people could be returning back to Mariupol. But for now, the United Nations does say it's important to organize humanitarian corridors leaving the city. Russia says some of the citizens have been taken to Ukrainian territory, not just to Russian territory, but it does say when they do arrive in Russia, they're given hot food and drink. And there's also a scheme, Russia says, for some of these people leaving Ukraine to receive a one-time payment of around $125 aimed at the elderly, pensioners and public state employees. Throughout the so-called special military operation, Russia says it's given 700 tons of water, food, medicines and building materials to Mariupol and to keep it moving while the special military operation is underway. And in general, there have been issues between Ukraine and Russia, both blaming each other in arranging humanitarian corridors, but Russia confident that at least 100,000 people have made it out of the city.
In another development, we know Britain has announced fresh sanctions targeting Russian army chiefs as well as individuals and businesses. What's the response so far from Moscow?
Yeah, it's quite a host of sanctions, and this is already on top of so many rounds of sanctions now from all sorts of Western countries. The United Kingdom on Thursday said at first it was targeting the defence industry and military generals, that these are the people leading the so-called special military operation in Ukraine, and that this will hit the companies that have blood on their hands, according to the UK Foreign Minister Liz Truss. On top of that, later in the day, the Ministry for Trade in the United Kingdom imposed a further set of sanctions on Russian products, things like caviar, high-end goods, diamonds, rubber, wood products and silver, a whole host of sanctions. Now, with regard to these particular ones from the United Kingdom, there is no comment. We know, though, that Russia tends to go for a tit-for-tat response in terms of designating people persona non grata in the UK when it comes to embassy disputes. We know that they then also block people from entering Russia when its own officials have been blocked from entering Western countries, and they try and provide some kind of reciprocal mirror response when it comes to trade. And the latest of that we saw also yesterday, with the United States and Canada having some of its citizens hit. Around 61 Canadians were hit by Russian sanctions, 29 US citizens, most notably the VP, the Vice President Kamala Harris, Mark Zuckerberg of Meta. And Russia says it's doing that in response to the ever-expanding anti-Russian sanctions under which the Joe Biden administration is bringing an increasing number of Russian citizens, and they expect to increase that list further. Russia's general response to these is that they are not legal. Unilateral sanctions should not go ahead, and they are weakening the global economy, not just Russia's economy.
Thank you very much. Our correspondent Stuart